We live in a unique city, a city that is changing the world. With a culture of creativity and art that is recognized globally. We have a hunger for progress and are home to one of the top universities in the nation. Austin, Texas is an epicenter of political activity and a launch pad for technological advancement. This city is changing the world. But there's a problem, because 8 out of 10 people in the greater Austin area haven't experienced that God loves them and is for them. For too long, the church has been known for what it's against. We want to be known for what we're for. We are for each other, the previous generation and the next. We are for our community, and we are for what hasn't been done before. We are for growth, belonging, and purpose. We are for Austin.
Well, it is great to see you guys today. It's just great being with you. And I want to say something before we actually jump in today. For those of you who are here today, and this is your first time to North Point, or you're relatively new, or for those of you watching online and you're relatively new, I just want to let you know, today we're in part 3. We're right in the middle of this very unique series called For Austin. And in this series, we've been talking about our church and kind of where, we've come from and what's happening today and where we're going, in the future. And we're talking about our future facility, and we're talking about what it's going to take to get us there. And so we're really excited about this. But guys, this is a very, very unique series. And 3 weeks from now, we're going to start a brand new series all about gratitude, which we're really excited about. But I just want to be up front with you guys and let you know that we're talking about something that's very particular to our church, and this is a unique series that I think will give you some insight into where we're going as a church. I think there's some practical things we're talking about, but again, it's a unique series. And so throughout this entire series, what we've talked about, or kind of a foundational statement we've made, is this. We said for far too long, the church has been known for what we're against. We, North Point, want to be known for what we're for. That we are for people, because every single person is made in the image of God. Every person has purpose and meaning and significance and worth and value and beauty. Every person. And that we are for the next generation, because it's the next generation. It's going to change the world. And that we are for our community. And throughout this series, I've just said, that's exactly what you guys have done. Because of your willingness to, year after year, come together and to serve and to sacrifice and to give, you've created a place, a very special place that is genuinely and authentically for people. And I am so incredibly grateful to be part of this. And in addition to that, we've said there is something that we can actually do today to be for people like never before. There's something we can do today to be for you and for me in ways we've never been able to be before as a church. And that very thing is to make the move into our future facility, into our future home. And by making this move, we can be for people in ways, again, we've never been before. And so in part 1, we talked about that. And I showed you a lot of pictures of where we're going and the piece of property and floor plans and, renderings. And if you weren't here during part 1, I want to encourage you to go to foraustin.com. On foraustin.com, you can catch up on what we've said. You can see all the different pictures. And that's just where we're going to keep everything updated in terms of, what's happening in the weeks to come. So don't forget to check foraustin.com out. Now, last week, in addition to that, I got up in front of you guys and I said, guys, this is the biggest moment we've ever had as a church. This is like those moments in your family, those kind of mile marker moments or those really defining moments. This is our biggest defining moment we've ever had as a church. And last week I said, guys, we will do more in our defining moment than pray, but we can't do anything until we pray. And I challenged all of us to be part of this and begin to pray some big and bold and persistent prayers, to begin to pray some kind of shameless audacity kind of prayers. And we looked at Jesus, and Jesus actually invites us to approach God in this way and pray these kind of big, audacious, bold prayers. And the reason why we need to pray some big and bold and persistent prayers is because we have a goal in Fort Austin to raise $5 million over the next 2 years. And then I shared with you guys, I said, there's some really good news is that over the last couple of months, we've actually raised just over 20%, just over $1 million towards our goal so far, which means our updated goal is we've got a goal to raise $4 million in the next 2 years as a church. And guys, that's going to require all of us coming together, doing something transcendent, doing something unique, doing something well beyond us, and praying some big, bold, and persistent prayers. And we want to partner with you as a church. So last week I said, we're launching our 21 days of prayer. And I showed you guys this, and we're 7 days into this kind of prayer process where we're asking God, we're inviting God, hey, God, you've got to be involved in this, and you've got to open my eyes for what you would have me or have our family, what it looks like for us to be part of Fort Austin. And I said, if we just trust the process and we just pray for 21 days and invite God into this, I think you'll hear from God in ways you've never heard from him before. I think you'll actually grow in your relationship in ways you've never grown before. So we're 7 days into this process. And if you're here today and you weren't here last week, I want to encourage you. We've got 14 days left. I want to encourage you to join us and be part of what's happening. And you can do that by texting 55222. Again, 55222. If you just text for Austin, uppercase, lowercase, it really doesn't matter. And that signs you up for the next 14 days to be part of this defining moment, to pray some big prayers and invite God in to this moment. And again, if you weren't here last week, as you guys walked out, in addition to praying some big prayers, we also gave you this bag. Inside this bag was a giving guide. There's also this Fort Austin bottle. Inside this Fort Austin bottle is some dirt from the actual property. And the whole goal of this is that bottle just symbolically represents where we're going. And it's just a reminder to say, let's come together. Do something transcendent together. Invite God into this process in ways we've never done before. So as you walk out today, don't forget to drop by the Fort Austin kiosk if you didn't grab one of those bags, and make sure, get one of those. So guys, that's where we're at. That's what we're talking about. We're right in the middle of praying some big prayers. And then on November 11th, which is part 5 of this series, we're all going to come together and we're going to say, here's what God led me to do. Not Buck, not North Point, but here's what God led me to pledge over the next 2 years. So that's where we're at. Now, with that said, last week, I introduced one of the favorite topics, one of the best things you can introduce in conversation with a church. I talked about money, right? And I know, here's the deal, when it comes to money in church, guys, I know that this morning when you got up and you got yourself ready and you were looking in the mirror and you're like, I need to look good, one of the thoughts you had is, I really hope Buck talks about money, right? I know you guys were thinking that. And I know if you're new or if a friend invited you and this is your first time to church and you're giving church another shot and you're going, man, I really hope today as I'm giving church another shot, that pastor gets up and talks about money and some details about money, right? Now, obviously, you know I'm just kidding, but my point of that is, guys, I'm one of you. I'm with you. I get the tension between money and church. And that's important to think about. But something else important when it comes to money, and something just kind of to think about, isn't it true when it comes to money, every single one of us have a very unique perspective? Isn't that true? I mean, for some of us, when it comes to money, our perspective around money is all about saving. We would call ourselves a saver. And that you would say, hey, my perspective when it comes to money is pinching pennies. Like, hey, I'm going to save and save and save, and I'm going to say, no, we're not buying that. No, we're not buying that. In fact, as a saver, you are a fixture. You're not a replacer. I mean, whatever gets broken, you're like, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. I know the transmission doesn't work in the car, but I can fix it, right? And that's what savers do. You just are like, we are not replacing anything, nothing new, nothing shiny. We are just fixing things. And for some of you, you would say when it comes to money, hey, I'm a saver. Now, for others of you, you would say, I'm the complete opposite. My perspective on money is all about spend, 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 right? It's like I'm going to spend, and then when I run out of money, I've got 2 little friends, Mr. Visa and Mrs. MasterCard, and they're going to help me spend a little bit more, right? Because you love new and you love shiny and you love to spend. And for some of you, if you're honest, you would just say, you know what? When it comes to money, that's my perspective. I'm a spender. Now, for others, you would say, I'm not a saver, I'm not a spender. I'm a giver. That's my perspective on money. I just love giving it away. I just love helping people. And for you, you would say, you know what? I can remember a moment in my life. I was watching TV. There was a dog on TV, and it looked like it was crying. And at the end, there was an 800 number, and it said for $19.95 a month. And I picked up that phone, and I gave because I'm a giver, right? And for you, that's just, and I'm telling you, if you are a saver or you're a spender, you look at givers, and you're like, those givers are so emotional. I mean, they just give to everything, right? But my point is, for some of you, you may go, well, that's just my perspective on money. I just love to give. And then for others, you would say, you know what? For me, I'm an investor. I'm an investor. I just love thinking about how I can make my money make more money. I'm willing to, lose some of my money. I'm willing to risk some of my money. But for me, I'm an investor. My point is this, is that although there's tension with money, which I recognize, isn't it true we all have a perspective on money? Have you ever thought about your perspective in your personal life? What's your perspective when it comes to money? And have you ever asked the question where your perspective came from? Did it come from your mom? Is that where you got your perspective? Did it come from your dad? Did it come from your upbringing? Maybe did it come from like a traumatic or a difficult event growing up in your childhood? Have you ever thought about your perspective on money and where it actually came from? Because guys, when we're talking about perspectives are powerful. Perspectives are a very powerful thing. I mean, perspectives are what actually drive us to do what we do. A perspective actually it leads us to do things differently in life. And the beauty is we have the power to change our perspectives. Isn't that cool? That God has given you and I freedom and the power to actually change our perspective on things in life. And we all have a perspective. We have a perspective on marriage. We have a perspective on kids. We have a perspective on school or on work or on a boss or somebody who hurts us. We have a perspective on what you should actually do with that person. And the beauty is we have the power to change a perspective. And isn't it cool when you change your perspective, it allows you and empowers you to do things you've never done before? And we've seen this time and time again. We've seen a marriage, and we've seen two people just going at it, and it's my perspective. Then all of a sudden, something happens. And there's reconciliation, there's healing, there's peace, there's intimacy they experience in a marriage. And you ask the question, what happened? Well, the answer to that is their perspective changed. All the beginning, I saw her differently. I saw him differently. And it led to something different in their life. It led to something extraordinary in their life. You and I have the power to change our perspective. But the opposite is true as well. We can hold on to our perspectives. We can dig our heels in and say, I am not changing my perspective. And oftentimes when we don't change our perspective, it holds us back. Oftentimes when we don't change our perspective, then it's always going to be his fault. It's always going to be her fault. And if she would just, or he would just. And it's like it shackles us. It's like it imprisons us. You see, perspectives are powerful. And we've all seen this. We've seen illustration after illustration. And a lot of times where we see this, most common is in terms of, personal health. That we've seen these before and after pictures. Here's what happened before, here's what happened after. For example, here's my friend Judd. Here he is. And so here's Judd before, and Judd's drinking beer, eating hamburgers, pizza, not thinking about a thing, hanging out, watching TV. And then something happened after, because here Judd is, working out, looking good, his diet has changed, he's drinking water. And the question is, what happened to Judd? I think a lot of us would say, well, he went to the gym, that's what happened. Well, what happened to Judd is he changed his diet. No, there's something that happened before that. His perspective changed. Perhaps he went to the doctor and the doctor said, hey, Judd, if you keep going in that direction, that's going to cut your life short as a husband, as a father in your life. And so Judd all of a sudden began to do things different in life. And it actually empowered him to experience life in a fuller way. That's the power of perspective, because perspectives are powerful. So, you may ask the question, why'd you start that way? Why in the world did I bring up money and the tension of money and the power of perspectives? And the reason why I started that way, and just kind of want to get that in all of our minds, is because of one question, and it's an important question. Have you ever thought about this? What's God's perspective on money? If you and I were sitting down and I just asked you that question, do you feel like you could answer that confidently? And think about this. I mean, if God is really for you, which he is, if God really unconditionally loves you, if God knows every hair on your head, if God knit you together in your mother's womb, if God has purpose and meaning for your life, if God was willing to send his one and only son, he didn't have some backups, right? One and only son for you. If he loves you that much, have you ever been curious about how he sees and his perspective on money? I think that's an important question. Now, the good news is this, is we actually know God's perspective on money because Jesus is crystal clear in Luke chapter 16 and gives us how God sees money. In fact, Luke 16 is a passage that we looked at about a year ago. And as I was thinking about, today and thinking about covering this passage, I said, we've got to talk about this again. Because today we're going to get some new kind of context and new information about Luke 16 that I think perhaps you've never heard before. But in addition to that, the reason why we've got to talk about Luke 16 is because throughout the entire Bible, it's the clearest passage. It's the clearest place in the entire Bible to go, how does God see money? Well, Jesus tells us, and he's crystal clear in Luke 16. So here's the context. Jesus is talking to this large crowd in Luke 16, talking to a large crowd, mixed crowd, and he begins to talk about money, and he does this by sharing this like made-up story called a parable, and it's a made-up story about a money manager. And he's talking about this money manager in Luke 16, and he goes, this money manager has a little bit of time, a little bit of opportunity, a little bit of time, a little bit of resources. And he says, here's what the money manager does, and the money manager leverages a little bit of time, a little bit of opportunity in such unique ways to benefit him. And so Jesus talks about the wisdom of this money manager, and look at how shrewd and look at how wise he was. And so the whole crowd is thinking about money and is thinking about, time and money and how to leverage these things. And right after that, Jesus speaks in to God's perspective on money, and here's what he says. He starts in a very interesting way. He says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourself. And at first when you read this, you go, what? Like, Jesus, are you saying I should take my worldly wealth and I should buy a bunch of friends? Like, I should take my worldly wealth and I should go party it up, and as long as I got money, I got friends? Is that what you're saying? Like, Jesus, what are you getting at? This doesn't make a lot of sense. Gain friends? Well, what Jesus says next really explains the context to what he's saying and what gaining friends means. Here's what he says next. He says, so that when it is gone, in other words, when your time is up, because all of us will have it, our time will all be up at some point, so that when it is gone, look at this, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. What? You're talking about eternity? What are you getting at here, Jesus? Now, here's what's so important to understand. John, the Apostle John, a follower of Jesus, tells us that Jesus came from heaven. In other words, the famous verse, John 3:16, where it says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son. Where Jesus came from was heaven. In other words, Jesus knows what eternity looks like. Jesus has seen the adventure of heaven. Jesus knows the context of heaven, and he knows how amazing it is. It's everything you have dreamed of times 10th to the 10th power. He knows it. And he has watched people come from this life into eternal life. And he's got all of that context. And Jesus comes in the world to explain God to you and to me. And Jesus says, guys, I'm telling you, the way you leverage your worldly wealth can have a reward in heaven. Not if you go to heaven. That's a whole nother conversation for another day. But reward in heaven. In other words, what he's saying here, he's saying, when you take your worldly wealth and you begin to leverage it, and you say, how can I leverage this to serve, to benefit, to lead as many people as possible, to discover that there's a God who's for them, to put their faith in a God who's for them. When you decide to do that, guess what? When you step foot into eternity, you will be welcomed and rewarded by those very same people. You leveraged your worldly wealth to impact their lives. He makes this connection between today and eternity. And remember, this is not my words. This is Jesus Christ, and he's giving us a perspective on money. In other words, what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, guys, hey, listen, when your time is up, and you step into eternity, that you can be welcomed and rewarded in eternity because of what you did with what you had. And in this very moment, Jesus gives us a perspective, God's perspective, and how he sees money. And what he teaches us is that God sees money as a tool. That God sees money as a tool. That your material possession, your worldly possessions, that God sees it as a tool to be leveraged, not for, the what, not to go, hey, what do I have to show for it? What do I have to show for it? Bigger home, bigger house, bigger experiences, bigger vacation. And God's not against those things. Don't hear me say that. I mean, God said, hey, you need to work to provide for your family, and that the resources that I've blessed you with, part of that is for your enjoyment. Have fun. But the big narrative, the big umbrella is not what do I have to show for it, but to leverage my worldly wealth with this question in mind. Who will you have to show for it? It's the who. Now, as I study this passage this week, I'm just telling you guys, I couldn't help but pause behind, at my desk and looking at my computer. I couldn't help but pause this week and just reflect on each one of you. Because the truth is, you guys get this. This is what you've done year after year after year. That you've chosen to say, God, here's what you've entrusted me. I'm just a steward. I'm not an owner because I'm here today, gone tomorrow. And I've leveraged this in such a way to invest it, to benefit, to serve, to lead as many people as possible to discover there's a God who's for them. That's what you guys have done. And that's one of the reasons why I say, man, I am so privileged. I'm incredibly grateful to be part of this with you because of what you've created. You've done a remarkable job. As I thought about that, I also thought about this concept of worldly wealth. Jesus, when he's talking about worldly wealth, oftentimes what we think about is, what he's getting at is my money. Hey, he's talking about my money, right? But it's a much bigger term. In the original language, it's a term to say everything. It's everything you have. It's your possessions, it's your collections, it's your home, it's your cars, it's your vacation, it's everything you have. That's what he's talking about. And Jill and I discovered this principle at a deeper level several years ago. Before we actually started North Point, and I was working at Dell, Jill and I met with this couple, and it's a mentor couple. And they were meeting with us because they knew that we were thinking about making this transition to start this incredible church with incredible leaders. And so they were meeting with Jill and I, having lunch and having breakfast. And this was a great couple, very influential in Austin. They've made a huge impact. They've led a lot of people, to discover a God that's for them. And so we're meeting with them, and they're talking about this whole principle. And they looked at Jill and I, and they said, hey, we know you guys are generous, but this idea of being generous is not just with your money, it's with everything. And they began to explain this whole principle to us. And we just listened, and they were the real deal. Like, as they explained this, we knew what they were talking about because they lived it out. Because we had been to their house, and we've seen their house, and they could have lived in a much bigger home, but they said, you know what, we could, but we just chose not to because we said, we just want to leverage what we've been given, a little bit of time, a little bit of opportunity. We want to leverage that to serve, to love, and to lead as many people as possible to discover a God who's for them instead of buying a bigger house. And this is their story. This doesn't mean this is just their story they shared with us. And then we went into their home and we looked at their carpet, and you looked at their carpet and you're like, goodness sakes, like you got to replace this stuff. Like there's pieces missing. And we asked about it, and they just said, hey, you know what? We could, but instead we just wear shoes. It's good, no big deal. And they said, we're not going to replace our carpet because for us, we've just decided that we're going to leverage those funds instead to serve and to lead people to discover a God who's for them. And then you went into their bathroom and you looked at the linoleum on the floor, and it's like peeling up and there's wood, and you're like, dude, you need to do something about this. But again, the narrative and the story was, no, we just decided instead of doing that, we'll just wear shoes in there. And you looked at their car, and he was a big man, and he drove a little bitty car. And I was like, what are you doing? But they got this. They lived it out before Jill and I. And they explained this. And this was a lifestyle. We just said, well, I guess that's what we're signing up for. And guys, many of you know exactly what I'm talking about because you have chosen this lifestyle as well. If you said, okay, God sees money as worldly wealth, you got a little bit of time. And how can I look at that in such a way to leverage it, to serve, to benefit, and to lead as many people as possible to discover there's a God who's for them? Because if I choose to do that, I will be rewarded and welcomed in eternity to come. That's the first thing he teaches us. And then he continues in this discussion, and he gives us an additional insight and additional perspective. And he says this. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. And you read this, and you're like, Jesus, where'd you go? This sounds like a Chinese proverb. What are we talking about here, Jesus? Are we talking about money? And he gives us a little bit more context, and he says, so if you have not been trustworthy, look at this, in handling, here's our term, worldly wealth. In other words, if you haven't leveraged what I've entrusted to you, what I've blessed you, what I've given to you as a steward for the purposes that I've asked you to, if you haven't leveraged your worldly wealth for the reasons that I've given it to you, then he says, who will trust you with true riches? And here you go again, Jesus, bringing eternity. Not if you go to heaven or not. That's a different question. That's a different discussion. But you keep connecting the dots to my faithfulness, to my stewardship, to how I leverage this to eternity and to being welcomed into true riches. And then he gives us a slightly different perspective. And remember, these are the words of Jesus. And he says this. He says, and if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? And I love what he does. This is so insightful. He says, listen, there's something inside of you and inside of me that wants security, isn't there? That you desire security, that I desire security. There's something inside of us that desires permanence. Like I want to say this is permanent in my life. But what God knows and what Jesus knows is that our life is finite. It's so quick. And he's saying, hey, there's something you can do to be trustworthy, to be faithful, to bring permanence and security and true riches in eternity. Not if you go to heaven, but your reward in heaven. And oftentimes we hear this and we're like, wow, man, that's just different. But remember, these are the words of Jesus Christ. And he gives us perspective. He gives us God's perspective. And the second way that God sees money is God sees money as a test. He sees it as a test. In other words, every single one of us have been given a little bit, right? Every single one of us have a little bit. And you may argue with that and you go, no, my friend has a lot bit and I got a little bit and they have a little bit more bit. And you're like, I don't have it, and you look around and you see that, right? And I get that, I'm with you. But from God's perspective, come on, think about this. From God's perspective, the creator of the universe, the creator of billions and billions of galaxies and stars. From God's perspective, all of us have a little bit. And what God is saying is how we leverage that little bit. If we're trustworthy with a little bit, that he's watching what we do with a little bit. Because that can lead to true riches in eternity. That it is a test. Now that's different. That's different for all of us to think about. But remember, these are the words of Jesus. Now, for some of you, you hear that and you're like, Buck, I really struggle with that. Like, Buck, this whole idea that what I do today somehow impacts, reward and true riches and property and all that kind of stuff in heaven, I just struggle with that. And you would push on that and you would say, well, I don't give because of that and I don't leverage, my worldly wealth because of that. I do that because I love God. And I've experienced his amazing grace. I've experienced his unconditional love, and I just want more people to experience that. And because he loves me, that's why I do that. And if that's you here today, then giddy up. Like, keep going. That's a great perspective. But for others, you hear this and you're like, I love it. I love this. This is motivating for me. Because you're saying that I can do something with something that's temporary, that's going to be gone anyways. When I die, it's going to be gone. I can do something today with what I have that brings permanence and security and eternity to come. Jesus would say, yeah, there's actually something you can do. And for you, that is a huge motivator. Jesus says the way God sees money is as a tool, as a test, and then he gives us our third and final perspective. And he says this. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. Such interesting, like, kind of polarizing ideas, like, love and be devoted and hate and despise. You couldn't get any further on the spectrums over here. Jesus, what are you talking about? Look at this. He says, you cannot serve both God and money. You can't do it, kiddo. As much as you try to tell God, well, God, I'm going to balance this out, and I'm going to serve a little bit of God, they're mutually exclusive. One will always be subservient to the other. You will either choose to say, my stuff is what I'm devoted to, what I have is what I'm devoted to, and God, you better bless me so I can have more stuff. Or you're either going to say, no, God has my heart. He's the one I'm devoted to, and I want to leverage what I have for his purposes. But you're going to have to pick. You can't have it both ways. And guys, all throughout Scripture, this is what Jesus says, doesn't he? Over and over and over, he talks, the number one practical thing he talks about in the entire Bible, the number one thing Jesus talks about, practical subject, is money. Have you ever wondered why? Why would he spend his time, his limited 3 years of ministry, talking so much about money? Do you know why? Because he knew that the chief competitor for your heart and my heart, for our security, for our devotion, is our stuff. And he just calls it out. And he gives us this third perspective, that God sees our use of money as a trademark. You know what a trademark is? It's a mark that represents ownership. And how we leverage and how we use marks our heart and allows us to know who has our heart. So Jesus, in this moment, with the crowd, with us today, says, you want to know how God sees money? He sees it as a tool, as a test, as a trademark. Well, the crowd hears this, and they're listening to all these things. And in this crowd, there was a group of people called Pharisees. And the Pharisees in the crowd were the rich of the rich of the rich. I mean, they had money managers. They were so rich. And the Pharisees were the religious leaders of the day. And in the first century, a religious leader would think, well, hey, I'm blessed by God. I mean, God's given me the words. God's given me the intellect. God's given me the insight into kind of the kingdom of God things. So God, therefore, must bless me. I should be the most blessed one of everybody else. That was their thinking. And so they were incredibly rich in the first century. And they're listening to all this Jesus has to say, and their arms, you can imagine, their arms begin to fold, and they're just listening to this, stomping their feet. And here's how it wraps up. It says, the Pharisees, who loved money, heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. Jesus, how could you? Seriously, you're connecting my worldly wealth to eternity? Are you kidding me? How do you have that kind of insight? Why would you even talk about something that's that personal to me? Do you know how hard I worked for this? Do you know who I mean, Jesus, really, this is ridiculous. They're sneering at Jesus. And then Jesus looks at him, and here's what he says. You are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others. In other words, you walk around pretending, that you're this like really connected person with God, and you're so generous and you're so great, and you continue to justify yourselves before others and say, I wish I could give a little bit more to the church. I wish I could do this a little bit more. I wish, but justify. And then he says, but God knows your hearts. God knows who has your hearts. So Jesus, in this very moment, with the crowd and with us today, says, you want to know how God sees money? I've come from heaven and I'm telling you, here's how he sees it. That God sees money as a tool. It's to be leveraged in such a way to lead and to serve and to benefit people so that they can discover that there is a God who really loves them and is for them. And so that you can be welcomed by that very same person or those individuals when you step in to eternity. It's a tool. It's a test. That when we choose to be faithful, when we choose to be trustworthy and realize that we are simply stewards, it's here today, gone tomorrow, we're not owners. And that if we're faithful, God is watching, and there is reward, true riches, property of your own. And that it's a trademark. It shows who actually has our hearts. Now, the beauty is what we said earlier, that perspectives are powerful. And you and I, we actually have the freedom to change our perspective, to see things differently in life. And this is such a big deal in terms of the way God sees money. Because when we choose to see as God sees, we experience some incredible, incredible things in our life. So, we're talking about money. Think about it this way. When we see money as God sees money, it frees our hearts to trust him. Because Jesus earlier alludes to this whole idea that says, hey, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And when we say, God, okay, we're going to trust you. We're going to look at what you've entrusted to us. You've given us the talents. You've given us the intellect. You've given me the abilities. And so you've entrusted this. And God, I'm going to leverage this in such a way to serve and to lead individuals. And I'm going to look at the whole thing, just not my finances, but the whole thing. It leads our heart to discover God is for us. And it actually frees our hearts to be fully committed to God. When we see money as God sees money, it frees us to experience God's faithfulness in new ways. Guys, I'm telling you, I have experienced this personally. I've seen this in so many lives. I've heard this in so many stories. That when we decide to say, hey, God, I'm just going to trust you, and I can't figure it all out, but I'm just going to trust you. And see money as you see money, it's like we get a front row seat to the faithfulness of God. It's like God begins to show up in our lives in ways we've never experienced before, and we're like, man, I've just never seen this. I've never experienced this. This level of contentment that God has given me. God, I am trusting you, and I'm leveraging this for your purposes, and wow. I've never experienced this level of contentment. I've never experienced this peace that does transcend all understanding. And God, I get a front row seat how you provide. When I'm thinking about how in the world is this going to work out, how are we going to make this happen, that I'm telling you, when I begin to see as God sees and I begin to trust you, it's like an invitation for your faithfulness and your provision in my life in a way I've never seen before. You get a front row seat to that. And because of that, when we begin to see as God sees money, it frees us from the worries of tomorrow. That because we've seen his trustworthiness, because we've seen his faithfulness, because we've seen his provision, sure, there are realities in life that cause us to worry and have anxiety about tomorrow. I'm with you, I get it. But we've had a front row seat to his faithfulness. We've seen him show up in relationships. We've seen him show up financially. We've seen him provide time and time again. And it propels us. It leads us not to have to worry about the tomorrow. And when we see money as God sees money, it frees us to be for people like never before. It's like we get a front row seat to genuine, authentic life change. That we get to see story after story after story after story of so many students, story after story of so many adults. And when we see their stories, we get to sit here. And we don't need to say anything else in our mind, well, you know, but we get to sit there and we get to go, wow, God, I got to be part of that. You allowed me to be part of their story. You get a front row seat to be part of something transcendent, to be part of the greatest thing or one of the greatest things we could possibly be part of in life. Authentic, genuine life change. Now, you hear that and you may go, well, Buck, that just sounds too good to be true. That's just preacher talk. But guys, the reason I'm telling you this is because I've personally experienced this. I've had this front row seat. And many of you have experienced this as well. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I remember for Jill and I, many, many years ago, when I was working at Dell, the church we were part of had this big thing, and they wanted to be for people, and do some incredible things. And they challenged us to pray some big prayers and invite God in and say, God, how what does this look like for me to be part of, my family? And I remember at the time, Jill and I went through that process, and we were just praying, and we were feeling a lot of the same things you guys would feel, we feel, right? Like, God, how's this going to work? We're having kids like no tomorrow. I mean, they're just coming one after another after another. Like, how's this whole thing going to work? And God, what about this? And what about that? And, all these real tensions, and I mean, they're legitimate. We're praying through that. God, what about? And we decided, here's what we're going to do over the next couple of years. Here's what we're going to invest. And we got up and we turned our pledge cards in, and for us, it was a really big number. We just didn't know how it was all going to work out. And over the next couple of years, as we were, being consistent and to our pledge, for Jill and I, guys, it was hard. It was difficult. It was a sacrifice. I mean, it's a big deal for us. But you know what happened? I'm telling you, it's like we just got a front row seat. And we begin to see God show up in our lives, and it's just our story. I can't explain it. But God provided financially in ways we were like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? We were so worried about that. And God give contentment. I mean, you guys know I love Apple devices, and I just want to buy the latest and greatest and latest and greatest. And God just gave contentment in ways we've never experienced before. He honestly gave a peace that you can only experience this kind of peace. It's that peace that does transcend all understanding. You're like, where in the heck did that come from? Like, I was so worried, but now there's something different. And we got a front row seat. When we saw life change stories, it wasn't like we talked ourselves out of, whatever was going on. We looked at those and we were like, wow, I got to be part of that. And we saw the faithfulness of God. And so, yes, was it difficult? Yes. Did it require sacrifice? Yes. Was it hard? Yes. But guess what? Like, my whole family lived indoors. And we all ate 3 meals a day, as you can probably tell, I didn't lack many meals. And we had great experiences as a family, creative, innovative, but we still had incredible experiences with our kids. And we saw the faithfulness of God in incredible ways. We have seen that time and time and time and time again. And I know we're not alone, because many of you have seen that exact same thing. Now, I know that for some of you, you're sitting here and you're going, well, Buck, I'd love to do that. I want to see as God sees. I want to experience those things in my life. But when it comes to money, it's like I've got a blindfold. Like, I am so lost financially. When it comes to money, we're so stuck financially. And if that's you here today, we want to partner with you as a church. We really do. And if you feel that way, then I really want to encourage you to go to npaustin.com, Money Matters. Again, that's npaustin.com/Money Matters. And this is our way just to partner with you as a church. When you go here, here's what you're going to see. You're going to see the Money Matters page, and this description just talks about that it's a 9-week small group. And it's really all about helping you take a step to win with your money, helping you take a step from, surviving to thriving financially, helping you take a step to begin to see as God sees when it comes to your finances. And you may have questions, you may go, well, hey, I need more information. There's buttons at the bottom. You can click on one of those for more information. You can click on one of those to sign up for our next 9-week small group. It's kind of our short-term group. Or you can just say, hey, I need somebody to meet with me now. And we've got incredible leaders to partner with you and just kind of walk through where you're at and help you get to a place where you're winning financially. And if you scroll down, here's what you're going to see. There's a story of an incredible couple here at North Point who went from, kind of surviving to thriving financially. It's an incredible story. And then this button here says additional tools. If you click on that, here's the page that's going to pop up. It's a page all about budgeting, and we want to provide some really effective budgeting tools, because if you're going to get unstuck financially, you got to know where your money's going. You got to get clarity with where your money is going. So there's some great budgeting tools. In addition to that, if you scroll down, there's an app. It's a free app. It's called Every Dollar. It helps you track every single dollar you spend. If you're going to get unstuck, if you're going to get unlost, you got to know where your money is going. And so this is just our attempt to partner with you to help you experience the freedom God has and desires for you. So, bottom line, how does God see money? At the end of the day, what's his perspective? He sees it as a tool, as a test, as a trademark. And when we see money as God sees money, it frees our hearts to be for people like never before. And in the midst of the biggest thing we've ever done as a church, for us to be authentically and genuinely for the incredible people in our community and in our city, I think we've got to ask the question, God, how do you see it? If you're for them and you want me to be for them, how do you see one of the greatest tools you've given me and trusted me so my heart can be for them in ways like never before? And when you do, you get a front row seat to the faithfulness of God. Let me go ahead and pray for us. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for the fact that you love us. And God, I know when we talk about this stuff and talk about money, and I know we're at a million different places, but I ultimately know that you know our hearts. You know what's inside of us. You know our perspectives. You know where they come from. And so, Father, this week, I just ask that you would meet each of us individually. Open our eyes to the things we need to see, and give us the courage to trust you in ways we've never trusted you before. God, I just trust you with that. Thank you for today. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week for part 4.